I wonder what your thoughts are as you look ahead to events week. I wonder what your heart says, what your emotions are as you look ahead. Maybe in the business of term so far, you've barely given it a second thought. Maybe tonight you're sat here and you're going to hear it mentioned a few times. I'm going to talk about it a little bit. Matt's going to come and talk about it later. And it might be the first time you've thought about it. Or maybe like me, you're excited. You just can't wait. Because of the opportunity that you have to ask your friends to come along to hear the good news of Jesus explained. To really grapple with questions. Maybe you can't wait. You're absolutely buzzing. You think, all through this year, I've been trying to get stuck in, get to know my flatmates, my course mates, people in my clubs, my societies, my teams. Here's a great chance for them to just come along and hear that bit more. Maybe you cannot wait. Maybe you can't wait even. This might be part of your mindset. Maybe you can't wait for others to see people walk in with you as you come in. That might be what you're thinking, part of your emotions. Maybe you're really, really nervous. Really nervous. You think, whole week of events, 10 events, and I'm supposed to be going up to my friends, those people I know, and asking them to come along to an event where they're going to talk about Jesus. That's tough. Maybe you're nervous. Or maybe you're even slightly worried thinking, I just don't know anyone I could invite. I just cannot think of anyone who isn't a Christian who I could invite along. You just don't know where, you just don't know who you could invite. Maybe that's going through your head. I wonder what your emotions are. Try and engage them for a moment in your head and in your heart. What's the overriding emotion as you think ahead to events week? And here's the thing, the likelihood is it'll be pretty similar to other people in the room. So you might think you're the only one who really is terrified. The only one who's dreading it, the only one who's gutted thinking about what's to come, the expectation on you to invite people along, to bring people along, to put aside bits of your lectures and studies and those sort of things. Maybe you feel a bit gutted, but you're probably not the only one, right? You're probably not the only one. If you're excited, you're probably not the only one. Because we all have these sort of emotions, don't we? We all have these different emotions we think ahead. We all have different perspectives on it. And as we look at the passage that was just up on the screen, and hopefully you maybe still have in front of you, as we look at that passage tonight, we're going to see what a real biblical perspective might look like as we look ahead. See what a really good perspective might look like as we think about what the Bible says about mission, about sharing Christ with people. So if you haven't got it in front of you, maybe you've got it on a phone or on a Bible if you're still working on paper like me, it'd be great if you could just get that up in front of you on your phone. Or whatever it is, just as we pick through, you'll see one or two things that will hopefully be helpful as we go out of here. So why not do that if you can? And here's a bit of context for you. And we might have that up on the screen as well. Here's a bit of context for you. Here's Paul and Timothy alongside him, writing to the church in Corinth. And he talks a lot about some real tough times, some real trials that he faces. You see, for Paul, it wasn't easy. And he goes on later in the letter to be really explicit, listing the times he was shipwrecked, he was beaten, he was flogged, he was hated, he was thrown away. It was tough for him. It was really tough. But just before our passage in chapter 4, we see at the end of chapter 3, him talking about the glory of the new covenant. Real joy at the glory of God's covenant with us. That means that we can have life. He's joyful. He speaks with that real joy at what's going on. And you see, he knew the glory of the gospel. He knew the glory of the gospel, but also he knew it could be tough. Experienced that more than anybody else. It could be really tough. I wonder what you think when we talk about trying to share Christ with people. Hopefully it's something you talk about a lot in C. You talk about it together. I wonder what you think about that. You see, do you feel like it's a burden? Because it can be tough, can't it? People week after week saying to you, come on, tell your friends, tell your friends, tell your friends. Come on, you've got to, it's important, it matters. Maybe it just weighs down on you. Maybe it's like another thing's been put into your rucksack. I don't know if when you were at school, if your school was anything like mine, your year sevens tended to be keen, didn't they? And they'd have those big backpacks on, and by the time you got to sixth form, you'd have either one of those tiny little bags you couldn't fit anything in, or you'd have one of those shoulder bags or something like that. But they used to be these big backpacks that they'd fill things up with. Anyone else like that, or was that just my school? Maybe we were all full of nerds. But people would put their textbooks in, and they'd bring every book you could possibly need. And it was as if another burden was being laid on them, on top and on top and on top. And you'd see them walking around school like this, like slightly slumped over backwards because of the weight of the things on their shoulder. shoulders as they felt burdened. And I remember even sitting in a German lesson, so I wasn't paying much attention, a German lesson, must have been year 9 or 10. Honestly, I tell you, this is true, 100% true. I looked out into the playground, and in the middle of the playground was a year 7 lying on his back with his backpack weighing him down. 100% true. And he was wriggling around, but because of the weight of everything on his shoulders, all his textbooks, he genuinely couldn't get up. He genuinely couldn't get up. Someone had to go out and help him, stand him up onto his feet. Because you see, this bag was just burdening him down. Honestly, it was ridiculous. It was burdening him down. He couldn't get up. I wonder if you feel a little bit like that with the burden of things to come this term. With your course, with the pressures that you have, and with events week coming up. With the pressure to tell people about Jesus. Knowing it matters. Of course it matters. I wonder if you feel a little bit like that year 7. That maybe one more book and a little trip, and you'd be on your back, unable to get up in the middle of the playground. I wonder if you feel a bit like that. Where it can feel like a burden, can't it? But it can also feel disheartening maybe sometimes when things seem to go well. See, I think of a friend who I had at university. He was a rugby player. I played rugby with him. That was my big thing. Tried to get in amongst it with the rugby boys. A lad called John, great lad. And we used to call him Squat Rack because he had the skinniest legs you've ever seen. So we called it, that's incidental. But friend John we used to played rugby with. And we had some great chats. He was interested about my faith. I couldn't believe it early on, first year. We did a Christianity Explore course together. Me and a couple of other mates went through it, interested, really excited. He went on, came on a trip that Christian in Sport run to this incredible sports complex in Lanzarote in the summer, where each night we played sport all day, and each night we looked at the claims of Jesus. Brilliant. He's getting warmer and warmer. I gave him Case for Christ. What a book that is. He read that. Claims historically viable. I thought, this is great. The next year we read through the whole of Mark together. Brilliant, little group. But you know what, at the end of it, I said to him, John, so what's the crack? What's up? What do you think? Are you going to commit? And he said, I'm just not convicted. And a few months later, I asked him to another event, and he said, you know what? I've come down on the side of science. I'm not bothered anymore. Perhaps you've had that feeling where you think things are happening, and yet it just never seems to quite go the way you expected. You see, having to share Christ can sometimes seem like a burden, can't it? And that's where Paul kicks off here. Verse 1. Look down if you've got it in front of you. Look up if you haven't. Here's Paul and Timothy writing. Verse 1. Therefore, since through God's mercy we have this ministry, we do not lose heart. We do not lose heart. That was the claim. Paul had been battered, all these things gone on, and he says, therefore, since through God's mercy we have this ministry, we do not lose heart. It's because of God's goodness to them. It's God giving them that job. God giving them the task to go. It's his work. You see, guys, the pressure doesn't rest on us in one sense. It's God's work we're here to do. It's God's work. It's him we're serving. It's his ministry. It's almost like, and forgive me for the sporting illustration, my mind thinks in one way, and this is it. Imagine you were asked to play for Manchester United. Louis van Gaal, the manager, said, would you like to play for Manchester United football team? Monday night, Preston North End FA Cup coming up. We've got a job to do. It's my work, and I want you involved. You're not really that good, but come on. Be on the team. I'll take the rap. Whatever happens, I'll take the rap. It's my work. Freedom. Just go out there, express yourself. Just play. Just enjoy it. And it's my neck on the line. It's not yours. Now, wouldn't that be a far more freeing way to play football than if you went in with all the pressure and the burden and the expectation? Because the manager's put his neck on the line. He says, look, it's my job and I want you involved. I want you involved. Come along. I wonder if that's perhaps the feeling that Paul's feeling here as he talks about God's mercy providing his ministry. Therefore, since through God's mercy we have this ministry, we do not lose heart. Knowing it's God's work, it's him who's responsible, and it's him who graciously gives it to us, even though we don't deserve to be a part of it. It's his work. We do not lose heart. What a joy to think as we go out and try and share Christ, that it's his work, it's his ministry. And we go on to see Paul and Timothy's example there in verse 2, don't we, up on the screen there. He says this, rather we have renounced secret and shameful ways. We do not use deception, nor do we distort the word of God. On the contrary, by setting forth the truth plainly, we commend ourselves to everyone's conscience in the sight of God. Here he says, we set forth the truth plainly. That's what we do. That's our job. We're going to speak out, set forth that truth plainly. And we won't use deception. We won't be deceiving. We won't distort the word of God, but we'll step out. And I'm sure we all go, great, fair play, Paul. That's exactly what we think you should do. Yeah, speak about Christ. Don't distort it. Don't be deceptive. Of course we think that. And here's a quote from John Piper talking on this very subject. And he hammers this point home. He says this: if you alter or obscure the biblical portrait in order to attract converts, you don't get converts to God. You get converts to an illusion. This is not evangelism, but deception. You see, if we distort the picture of God, it's deception. It's not evangelism, it's deception. They're converted to something else, not to Christ. And we'd all probably heartily agree with that, I imagine. In principle, anyway, we'd agree with that. It's easy to say, isn't it? Easy to say we agree with what John Piper's saying, with what Paul's saying. But I wonder, is it also easy to do that ourselves, to actually be deceptive? I wonder if you've had one of these conversations where somebody asks you about what you think about sin. Am I sinful? Surely I'm not sinful. Are you telling me that because I don't believe what you do, I'm going to go to hell? I wonder if you've ever had one of those conversations. What did your heart do in that moment? I bet it sank if it's anything like mine. You went, how can I get out of this situation without saying truthfully what the Bible said? I can see a few little smiles because I think we know that it's something that we do. Because everything in us wants to protect our own reputation to get out of that. And maybe we just slightly distort the truth, just so it sits comfortably with them, we tell ourselves. Also, it sits comfortably with us. Maybe that's one thing. Maybe somebody said to you, you know what, I like you. I like you. You're not like other Christians because you're not one of those Christians who just wants to convert everybody. I like you. Any of you said that to you? And you go, in your heart, you go, oh, I'm desperate for you to know Christ. I'm desperate for you to do it. What do? We go, yeah, those Christians flip. They do my head in. They absolutely do my head in. And then you think, can I ask them to an Events Week talk off the back of this conversation? Can I? But just somewhere there's that little bit of distortion, bit of deception. Or maybe it's a big issue like sexuality, a big issue in our culture and with the Christian faith. And you just slide away on the view which you don't quite hold and you don't think's true, but it just makes it a bit easier and you don't want to think badly of Christians. Maybe you just slide away, just distort the truth that little bit. Or maybe it's the sort of deception where your friends don't even know that you're a Christian, where actually you keep that tucked away and they don't even know that you're a Christian. Maybe you're deceptive in that sense. Will we, week to go before Events Week, will we go, 10 days to go, set forth truth plainly? Be bold. Set forth the truth plainly. I can barely speak. Set it forth plainly. I've said it again. And speak out. Go for it. Don't be tempted by using deception, distortion. This has power in it. God's truth. And I suppose the question that we might ask is, how can we start to speak plainly about God? How can we start to speak like that? Andrew's going to help me for a minute. He's going to jump up. And I've vaguely prepped him, but not really about this, so I'm sorry if it goes disastrously wrong. This is something we've been talking about a little bit with Christian in Sport this year. I found it massively helpful in my witness in my rugby club about trying to just start to speak about Christ. Just start to speak about Christ in some way. And there's a couple of little phrases that we've used to try and help us to do this. And just as somewhere in your conversation, say something about Jesus. Not be abstract, talk about faith or God or church, but talk about Jesus. Somewhere in your conversation, talk about Jesus, and to follow it up with a question. Jesus plus question. Okay, that's what we've been trying. Sounds frightening. Sounds frightening. And the other thing we've been saying is a little phrase as just a pattern for normal conversation as we try and engage with people and be honest and open and normal. We've said this: your news, my news, good news. That's the pattern. Your news, my news, good news. Okay, so for the benefit of this, we're going to pretend that Andrew's not a Christian, and therefore he's no longer a UCF staff worker. And we're going to try this conversation. And so I'm going to be a Christian, and I'm going to ask him first about his news. Sorry, I am a Christian, just for clarification. We're slipping into role, so I'm just reiterating the fact I'm a Christian, both now and in this role play, okay? So here we go. I'm going to talk about, ask Andrew about his news, and hopefully if he's a polite British man, at some point he'll ask me the same question back and I'll have a chance to talk about my news. And somewhere in there, I've got to try and mention the word Jesus, and to ask him a question, to talk about good news. So let's see how it goes, okay? This could go horribly wrong. Imagine it's Friday. Today's Thursday, tomorrow's Friday, just for clarification. Friday.
Not a Christian.
Andrew, good to see you, mate. How are you doing?
Yeah, good, mate. It's been a bit of a tough week, though.
Has it?
Yeah, getting a lot of that. At home, home's difficult and work pressure's piling up a bit. So really looking forward to the match on Saturday.
Yeah.
Let off some steam.
You're a sportsman as well. Oh, you play for my team. Oh, I'm with
Yeah.
you. Yeah, it's good. It's good that I didn't know that. Yeah, it's rugby. That's it. That's the real man's game. Great. Sorry to hear that, mate. It sounds like it's been tough. Have you been able to do much? What did you get up to? What have you been up to? What were you up to last night, for example?
Washing the dishes.
Washing the dishes.
That was awful. But it was my fault. Like Sarah had a rough week of it, and there I go storming in, thinking I'm the man, and yeah. So
I don't quite know what to go from there. So last night, not the best, washing the dishes. Is that all you got up to? You telling me you're serious? That's all you did yesterday?
Yeah. You? Was your...
Well, you know, I suppose my week's been all right, actually. It's been pretty good. Did a lot of work yesterday, just ploughing through, a little bit of training as well. Got a gym session in. Oh, and last night, I went to... I was with the Christian Union last night, actually. You know, I often do that on Thursdays. Really great, actually. Enjoyed it. This guy was talking about Jesus and his power. It's just how Jesus is powerful.
Right.
Have you ever, I suppose, it's a bit random, sounds a bit random, doesn't it? Have you ever heard anything like that before? Or?
Could have done with a bit of that last night.
Could you?
Just getting through all the washing up.
A bit of his power.
But, yeah, well, you know... There's the neighbour who's the Christian, and he's the good guy, and I don't think it's all that, Mike. You know, he's this holier than thou kind of a guy, and so yeah. But.
Well, it's interesting that because actually, I suppose my understanding of Christianity is actually it's about people who aren't that great, and that's the whole point. But I tell you what, I know you've got a dash, but if you do want to hear any more about it. If you do want to hear any more about it, I'm going to go along to a load of talks, not this week, next week.
Okay.
And you'd be more than welcome to come with me. Just talk a little bit more about Jesus and what that means to be, you know, to be actually why Christians are actually just rubbish people saved by grace.
Well, I'll see you tomorrow for the match.
Yeah, we'll see you tomorrow. Looking forward to it. I get a good sleep in. Enjoy. Okay, so... Hopefully people that you speak to won't be as deliberately obstructive as that. So, but you see, here's the principle. Okay, just to start speaking about it, we're not talking here about speaking about the gospel fully. We're just talking about trying to be truthful and trying to engage in conversation. But here's the principle. Your news, ask them about their news. Just be normal and ask people about what they're up to. Don't hide away. Ask about your news. I was a little bit strategic there in knowing I'd been here last night tonight, but I was tomorrow, and ask you about that. And and eventually I didn't just stop. It wasn't, I'm happy to keep asking about the question. We're in a limited amount of time there, so I had to rush him through it. And eventually he asked me back, and I was just tried to say something of Jesus. Now it felt a bit cringy maybe, and you thought, I could never do that in a million years. I could never do it, but I reckon you could. I reckon you could. So I reckon you could just throw the word Jesus in there, and actually if you're a Christian, that should be a natural thing to be able to speak about. And then ask him a question. Now if he shuts me down and goes, you know what, Mike, not bothered at all, which he tried to do, which actually I probably should have responded in a way, I can go, no problem, hey, really looking forward to Saturday, are you feeling fresh, whatever it might be, just move the conversation on. But if he says to me something and he goes, you know what, yeah, I have actually, used to go to church a little bit, or, yeah, it's funny, I've met loads of Christians, and you all seem a bit, whatever the word is. You might, then maybe there's just a chance to follow that conversation on. Just to start speaking out. Perhaps you could do that this next week. Just try and have one of those conversations. Lots of different ways where the gospel touches your life. And maybe that can just come out in conversation somewhere in there. Would we set forth the truth plainly? Not use deception, but set forth the truth plainly. But you see, even sometimes when we do set forth the truth plainly, we still come up against that barrier, don't we? So I think of my mate, John. I've never set forth the truth as plainly to anyone as him, ever, before, after. I don't think I've ever set it forth as plainly as that. Do you know what? He's not a Christian. And more than that, he's kind of investigating and saying, nah, not bothered. And you see, we see that in the passage, don't we, as you look down, or look up again, verses 3 and 4. See, here's the reality. Verse 3, and even if our gospel is veiled, it is veiled to those who are perishing. The God of this age has blinded the minds of unbelievers, so that they cannot see the light of the gospel that displays the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. See, here's the reality. The devil has blinded the minds of unbelievers, so that those who don't trust in Christ cannot see his glory. They cannot see who he is. That's the reality. That's the reality for my mate John. It's the reality for every friend who isn't a Christian. They've been blinded. They cannot see. And you know, however much you ask a blind man to look at a picture, however much you ask him to, he will never be able to marvel at how great it is. If you show him a painting, however much you ask him to look at it, he'll never be able to marvel at how great it is. And it's the same here. So how can they respond? And this is where this passage just thrills my heart, right? As we move on and we look down at verse 6, verses 6 and 7. This is the real punch of the passage. For God, who said, let light shine out of darkness, made his light shine in our hearts to give us the light of the knowledge of God's glory displayed in the face of Christ. But we have this treasure in jars of clay to show this all-surpassing power is from God and not from us. You see, it's God's power. It's his power that makes people see, that removes the veil from their eyes, that unblinds them, that shines the light of the knowledge of God's glory into their hearts. It's his power. It's him who does it. And I tell you what, isn't that greater than if it has to be your eye that does it? That it has to be your eye that persuades them. As we set forth the truth plainly, isn't it great that it's God's power? It's his power that changes people. You see, speak out. Here's the message. Speak out, but know where the power lies. Speak out, but know where the power lies. That should give us real confidence. And imagine this. Imagine for a moment you're a lumberjack, okay? Unusual, not something you imagine every day. But imagine you're a lumberjack and you've got a massive tree. Stick with me here. You've got a massive tree you've got to cut down. I'm no expert on being a lumberjack, but go with me. A massive tree. Now imagine I've got a chainsaw, and I took a chainsaw, and without switching it on, I thought, right, here we go. It's my strength. Bang, I'm going to saw through this tree. How am I going to get on? Not very well. Right? Imagine I've got to do that. Tree, few trees, forest, whatever it is. And I go, here we go. It's all about me. Bang. I start sawing away. With this chainsaw. I don't even switch it on. I'm not going to get very far. And in some way, it's similar. Because I've got to know where the power lies. If I switch on my chainsaw, I know that's what has the power to get through the tree. It's not me just slaving away. It's God's power. You see, for us, that's the message. Speak out, but know where the power lies. Know where the power lies. And he gives us a great picture here, Paul, where he says, for God who said, let light shine out of darkness, made his light shine in our hearts to give us the light of the knowledge of God's glory. You see, here's the picture that he's using. He's harking back to creation where God says, let there be light. Let light shine out of darkness. And there was. And that's what he's comparing it to. So, Ted, could you switch the lights out for us? Okay. And here we go. We're going to be in complete darkness, hopefully, in a moment. Okay, completely dark. Okay. Right, here's the deal. Brian Glynn, where are you? There we go, we can't see you. Brian, you're a senior statesman here. You've been around for a few years. I'd like you, with all your wisdom and your power, to try and switch the lights back on using your voice. Ted, don't help him out. Brian, let's go.
Yeah, let there be light.
Come on, mate, try a bit harder.
Touch of light, please.
Okay, politeness. One more time.
It's not working.
It's not working.
Let there be light.
Okay, you see, here's the point. We'll leave the lights off for a moment. Here's the point. You thinking that it's your responsibility to bring people to know Christ, to make them get it, to make them understand, is the same as thinking you could create light out of darkness at the beginning of the universe. That's the picture. Let's have the lights back, please, Ted. Here we go. So that's the picture. There we go. Okay? That's the picture, right? That's the likeness he's making. He's saying it takes the same power to create light out of darkness as it does to change somebody's heart and bring them to know Christ. It takes that same power. It's God's power at work in them that brings them to know Christ. It's his power. You see, we're called to speak out. We're called to speak honestly and openly about the gospel. But it's God's power at work. Know where the power lies. And he can do brilliant things. Or magnificent things, bigger than anything you can imagine. Know where that power lies. And as we think about Events Week, that's what we need to know, we need to love, we need to treasure. It's God's power at work. And what a treasure we have. Remember this treasure in jars of clay? We see in verse 7 that God came to save us, sent Christ to die for us, that we might have true freedom, that we might have forgiveness through him. What a treasure. But it's kept in unimpressive jars of clay like you and I. Unimpressive vessels, jars of clay. But we have this treasure. So that's the call, to speak out, to know where the power lies. And so I suppose my question for you as we get near to the end here, will you go for it? Will you go for it and speak out? Will you go for it and speak out, trusting in the power of the one who spoke light out of darkness? Will you go for it? 10 days to go, a week at Events Week, rest of the semester, rest of your life. Will you go for it and speak out and trust in the power of the one who shone light out of darkness? Let me tell you a story about a guy called Francis Dixon. It's not really about him, but that's where it starts. He was a vicar at a church in Bournemouth. And one day he spoke to his youth minister and he said, tell me a testimony. And this is what the guy said. He said, well, I used to be in the British Navy and I was stationed in Australia. And we stopped off at Sydney, Australia, and we went off into the town. He said, I was walking down the street, George Street, busy shopping street, and someone came from nowhere, this man, and he stopped me where I was standing. And he said to me, if you died tonight, would you be in heaven or hell? Where would you be for eternity? How do you know? And then he walked off. And that was it. But I just could not shake it from my head. I couldn't get it out of my head. And I went on and I investigated things a little bit more. And I came to know Christ. And now I'm here. Well, the vicar thought, that's an incredible story. What a story that is, of God working through one small act. God's power is special. And then him and his youth minister later that year went on a conference. And they went on a conference and, chat's pretty dry sometimes at these kind of Christian conferences. And they asked each other their testimony, asked this other guy his testimony. And he said, well, you know what? I used to live in Australia, in Sydney. And he said, one day I was walking down George Street, this busy shopping street, and a bloke stepped out and he put his hand in front of me and he said, if you died tonight, where would you go? Heaven or hell? Where would you be in eternity? And then he disappeared. And I just thought, I've got to do something about this. So I went into a local church, thought about it, eventually came to know Christ. And the vicar couldn't believe it. He said, 2 people, same story. Same story. The next year, 2 more people came to his church and had the same testimony. The same story about a man who stepped out on George Street in Sydney, Australia and said, if you died tonight, where would you be? And sometime later he went to Australia on a sort of speaking tour. And he was going around different places. And what would you do, right? If you turned up, you'd heard these 4 stories. He's in Sydney. What does he do? He goes to George Street. And he walks up and down, waiting for this man to appear. No sign of him. No sign at all. And he's gutted. He thought, I was going to find him. So he goes into a local church and says, I've heard this story. This sounds random, but I've heard this story from 4 different people of this guy who just steps out on this street and stops them with this question. And he said, oh, you mean Frank? You mean Frank Jenner? Well, he doesn't do that anymore. He doesn't do it anymore. And he said, oh, I'd love to see him. Where can I find him? So he lives a bit out of town. So he drove him out. And there's this little village out by the Blue Mountains. And went and knocked on this door. And this little old man came to the door. Not well. Came to the door. And he said, are you Frank? And he said, yeah. He said, oh, can we have a chat? Sat down, told him this story. And as he told him the story of the people he'd met, a few tears started to roll down Frank's face. And he said to him, you know what? When I became a Christian, I was so thrilled by the gospel that I said I'd go out and tell 10 people every day about it. And I realized this wasn't going to be easy, so I thought what I'll do is I'll get the bus into town and I'll just stop 10 people every single morning and ask them this question. But he said after a while, I think it was a couple of years maybe of doing it, he said after a while, I just became so disheartened because I never thought it had any impact. Never thought it had any impact. And then you've come to me today and told me. And he couldn't believe it. And the vicar went back, thrilled by this encounter, and actually did some research and found hundreds of people with the same testimony. And this guy, Frank, had no idea. You see, all he did was speak out, and he didn't know the results, but God worked. He's powerful. He's the one who did it. So I wonder what you'll think off the back of this tonight, heading into events week. I wonder what you could do. Maybe for you, it's telling somebody that you're a Christian. Maybe for the first time. Maybe it's someone new. Maybe loads of people know. But there's others you could tell. That conversation this week where somehow you mention you're a Christian. Jesus plus question. Whatever it is. Your news, my news, good news. Maybe it's telling somebody about events week and telling them you'd really love them to be there. Maybe that's the application for you. Maybe it's having people around your house for a meal and spending time with friends who aren't Christians and just telling them that you'd love them to come to stuff next week. Whatever it is, let's be praying that God would be at work. His power would be at work. And why don't we take 30 seconds now, 20 seconds, 30 seconds. We'll just have silence for 20 seconds or so. And I want you to just let that sink into your heads and your hearts and think, what is the one thing that I'm going to do this week as I go away from here? To speak out and to know where that power lies. 20 seconds, and then I'll pray. Father God, thanks that it's your power that saves. Thank you that you've saved us, those of us who trust in you. Thank you that you're at work. And Lord, thank you that you do equip us. Thanks for the opportunities we've got coming up to try and speak to others about you. Lord, please be helping us to do that, to be bold, to be setting forth that truth plainly. And Lord, please would you do great things at this university.